Here's another question for the guides. I have recently been having dreams about the nature of how, if we live in a multiverse, that the parallel timelines of all of the different experiences that we have are actually affecting my life. Like, you could call it my internal family system is actually not internal families or parts, or even exiles. They're different versions of me from different timelines. Not only that, but that oftentimes they're bleeding a lot into this reality. Can you please give me an understanding of how timelines work and how the different versions of us interact? Are they fully insulated from one another, or do they have a deeper connection with one another, or a more blend and overlap? Yes. So when we talk about the multiverse, it's very important that we start to recognize the fact that we're not in a system of threads, and those threads are very different, in which at every single moment you are having many, many threads that go off in many different versions of you, and then you can kind of jump around them. This has been the experience in the world for many, many, many millennia, millions of years, in fact. This reality in which we are in a space of variations, as some metaphysicists call it, in which every single moment has many, many variants, and we can jump around through timelines. That system is coming to a stop. And it has been, and it was most likely, in your perception of time, in around 2012, in which that came to a stop. What we start to recognize is that the reality of our world is coming together into less variation. It's part of the Kali Yuga. It's part of the experience of coming back around, in which the separation that we have experienced into many, many infinite number of multiverses for each individual is now collapsing back in on itself. When you experience other timelines, you are experiencing a compression of timelines, a coalition, a combining or collision of timelines, and you are finding that the space between all of these is becoming very, very thin, and the membranes between these lives is becoming very, very easy to jump across. This is something that we can experience as having a thought or a dream of another timeline, which I know that you have often. This may also be the experience of when it is that we are in a place of turmoil, we are going to pull in the life that has resonated the strongly with that turmoil. You've experienced this as waking up in the morning with a specific thought and finding that you have a very outsized reaction. You have a $10 reaction to a $1 problem. This is because, especially when you go to sleep, you are easily jumping between all of these different timelines. So if we see that at one point prior to 2012, everything was expanding and now we are in a place of contraction, we start to recognize that just as we are no longer derivatives of the self that we had 2 minutes ago, we are no longer derivatives that exist one in a million different circumstances of what happened 5 minutes ago. We are now working to integrate all of those places together. And we do that by creating a magnet within ourselves. And that magnet within ourselves is different than you can imagine, because what it says is, it says, I am a magnet in this moment. Whether I like it or not, all of my timelines are colliding and combining, but whether I like it or not, I am magnetizing all of those fodder dimensions, fodder timelines that are just over there doing things. I am attracting them to me with the magnet that I am created. This is the essence of the law of attraction, but the law of attraction was created prior to this shift. In many ways, it was created in preparation for this shift, with this understanding that your colliding timelines can make it so that suddenly you find yourself in a totally different world, a totally different space, even if you're within the confines of the life that you know. So, your job is to resonate with the highest frequency that you can. This has nothing to do with thoughts. Thoughts are the very last thing in this list of things that you must do. What happens before that is you generate fields. You generate fields of gratitude, of compassion, of hope. You do the Tonglen breath. Breathe in the suffering of the world, transmute it in your body, and release as love. You are capable of transmuting everything that comes into your system. And by doing that, you are pulling in all those timelines and you're saying, you can't affect me. I am immune to all of your machinations. And now I am breathing in those timelines and I am breathing out peace. I am digesting the timelines that are now collapsing in on one another, and I am releasing it. Does that make sense? Okay, the last question is about the telepathy tapes. There is a understanding of the fact that people who are autistic and nonverbal or have difficulty with verbalizing actually have telepathic abilities between everybody else. Can you talk a little bit about that phenomenon, since that's like, it's become quite a zeitgeist in our culture at the moment with this podcast? Yes, of course, everybody is telepathic. What we recognize is that everybody has the capacity and the capability to be able to become knowingly telepathic. We are continually, all of the stats about nonverbal communication is effectively a way of trying to convey the fact that it's not just gestures and physicality that is nonverbal. It is the experience of telepathy, and it's not necessarily in terms of talking between one another, but conveying intent. This has been referred to by people who do interesting experiments on plants as primal perception. This is what is come across by many as this understanding that when you lose one faculty, you gain sensitivity in others. So what we're recognizing, as we do with all neurodivergent people, is that they have an ability to be sensitive to something that everybody has, because they do not have the insensitive action of verbalizing. And so this is the beginning of an awakening that says, if they can do this, why can't other people do this? This is also a very important thing for the understanding and the acknowledgement that there are people in your world who are pathologized and who are given a status that is considered lower than, and that is not appropriate, as are no hierarchies appropriate, in the sense that everybody is on the x-axis. Yes, it is true that people require more support, and that the life of a caretaker of someone who requires more support is also difficult. But we also need to recognize that this system exists in such a way that we've had two things happening. One, we've had the fact that these people are now being cared for in our society, whereas before they may have been moved out of society, moved out of it by either killed or not, or left to die, or many other things that used to happen to people who were sensitive and who were different, for cultures who could not accept that. But then we also have this moment where we recognize that we have cultures that do not support the caretakers and who do not provide caretaking for those who need more physical support in our current three-dimensional reality. And so you're seeing that there is this stigma attached with the life of being a caretaker, or the life of having to do something with these extraordinary beings. And yet everybody is extraordinary. Everybody is extraordinary. There are some people who are just more attuned to their sensitivity, and they have been given difficulties or challenges with three-dimensional reality in order to be able to tell us and convey to us that there is more capacity in the human body than we have ever acknowledged in science and even in religion. We attribute it to saviors and saints and all these other people, and yet we recognize that everybody has this capacity. So I encourage everybody to ask themselves the question, what makes these people different? And hopefully you come up with the conclusion that they are just more sensitive. And so if they are just more sensitive, why can't all the rest of us be sensitive too?